listening to the Limitless Leaders podcast series brought to you by ASPS, the Aesthetic Society, and the American Hernia Society with the generous support of Allergan Aesthetics. I'm Dr. Marissa Tenenbaum, today's guest host of Limitless Leaders. I am a plastic surgeon practicing in St. Louis at Washington University, and I've been in practice for almost 14 years, doing mostly aesthetic surgery and breast reconstruction. On today's special episode, we have two amazing guests, Dr. Nicole Sommer and Dr. Lisa Hunsicker. Welcome. Dr. Sommer, could you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I am Nicole Sommer. I'm a practicing plastic surgeon in academics at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine in Springfield, Illinois. I perform mostly breast surgery and cosmetic surgery, and I'm also the program director.
That's great. Dr. Hunsicker.
Hi, Marissa. I'm Lisa Hunsicker. I am a plastic surgeon in private practice in South Denver. I've been in practice for over 20 years, and my practice is a combination of cosmetic and breast reconstruction as well.
Well, that is awesome. I'm so happy to have both of you here. And you are both amazing plastic surgeons, but that's not actually what we're talking about today. Today, we are talking about some fairly intense hobbies that you both have and how you kind of got into them, how you manage that with being a busy plastic surgeon and all of that great stuff. So Nicole, tell us what your sort of hidden special talent is.
I do triathlons and Ironman triathlons as well.
Yeah, not just triathlons, Ironman triathlon. So tell us, what is an Ironman triathlon?
So it is pretty much the longest distance triathlon. They do have some that are a little bit longer, but this is the one that is considered the big one when you talk about triathlons. It's a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike, and a 26.2 mile run, so a marathon.
Amazing. Well, we can't wait to hear how you actually train for that while being a mom and a surgeon. But Lisa, what is your very special, intense hobby?
Yeah, I'm not as exciting as Nicole. I'm a race car driver. All those things that Nicole does, I just drive that distance. So I'm kind of the lazy version. Nicole is the super athlete here.
So Lisa, that's funny that you said that. So one of my family friends actually works for NASCAR. He's not a driver, but he sort of works for the company. And he was telling me what tremendous athletes all these drivers are and how most people actually don't realize the athleticism and the fitness it requires to drive the way these elite race car drivers drive for as long as they drive. He said many of them are actually cyclists in their spare time, and they kind of track their metrics while they're racing. And he was telling me how intense it is. So don't sell yourself short.
It really is a lot of work. It's interesting because, I work out, I lift weights 3 times a week specifically for that. And I also do Peloton as well to help with endurance as well. It's interesting because some of the sprint races are about anywhere from 25 to 40 minutes. And then enduro racing, really, some of the longest race I've done is a 24-hour race, and that's a team race. So it's multiple people, but you may be driving in a car for 2.5 hours straight. The longest I've done is a stint that basically was about 6.5 hours. And that was just tremendous. So yeah, it does require a lot of work. And so diet and preparation, it's really interesting because I do have some friends who are triathlon athletes, very much like Nicole, and I have talked with them a lot to see what they do because I really do feel like it's helpful for us as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So I'd love to hear how you both kind of got started in this. How long ago and how did you get started? So Nicole, tell us about when you first started racing.
So I first started training for triathlons when I was a first-year medical student. I actually had a very good friend in medical school who had done an Ironman before when she was in college. And I'd always been a runner for fitness. I swam a little bit for fitness, never really biked much. So she sort of got me into swimming more and then also into biking. And it took me a couple of years to actually do my first triathlon because I like to prepare. So I'm not one to go train and then go do a race a month later. I had to be really ready to do a race. So I trained for a couple of years and then I started doing triathlons. For me, it was a very slow progression up to the Ironman distance. Some people do that, within a year of starting. That's their goal. They do that and then they're done. That was never my goal. My goal was always to continue to do triathlon for the rest of my life, but eventually work myself up to being able to do a distance like that.
So is that the distance you enjoy doing the most, or is it more that was kind of the pinnacle and you want to make sure you do them? But if you had your choice, would you do shorter distances more often?
Yeah, I think it's the latter. Like you said, I think it was the pinnacle. And I think I would probably do them more if my body could tolerate it. But I do think some bodies tolerate long distance more than others. And I've known for myself now that that is something I can do, but I'm not going to do it on a regular basis because it's just too hard on me. That distance is very, very, grueling. So yeah. I still will always do triathlons. I just may not continue to do them at that distance.
Yeah. Lisa, how about you? How did you get into car racing?
Well, I've been driving way too fast illegally for way too long. And so even as a kid, I grew up and my dad had a 1972 Corvette. And so that's kind of what, when I was in elementary school, what we were driving around in. And so that was always something that was like, oh, I need to be in a car that goes fast. And in fact, when I went to high school, I had this whole fantasy that I was going to be driving that, and I didn't get to drive that. And I was really mad at my folks. Like, how could you not let me drive the Corvette? So then when I finished my training, I actually bought a 2003, one of the 50th anniversary edition Corvettes. And I actually called my dad and revved the engine. Like, can you hear that? That's the sound of the Corvette. And so I started driving with that. But then in 2012, I converted over and bought a Porsche 911. And I've driven, Corvettes and BMWs and Porsches. And so as it turns out, one of the national driving instructors for the Porsche School of Driving that ended up living a block away from me. And so, to go and spend a long weekend out at doing the Porsche driving experience is thousands and thousands of dollars. And instead, I opted to work with him and do it locally and put all that money into high performance driving. Instead of a weekend, it became a much bigger project. And so I did high performance driving for about 3 years and then got my competition racing license in 2015.
So how does that all work in terms of just the logistics of being a race car driver? I think all of us really, we just sort of, see NASCAR and like the Indy 500 or whatever. So how does somebody like you, who kind of starts out as a hobby and you get more and more intense with it, like how just logistically does that work out?
It requires immense coordination. In fact, it's really funny because it's very similar to getting a patient ready for surgery. There's so many things that go into it and preparation and things that you have to have available. And, for me, I had to buy a truck because you had to haul a trailer that a race car would go in even before I had the race car. And so then bought the trailer and then bought the race car. And then you have to have crew, you have to have equipment, you have to have fuel, you have to be able to travel and then take off of work and coordinate with surgeries and coordinate call coverage and then have a family, which is even more interesting of like, okay, now I have a son and he's been part of the pit crew basically since he was in elementary school, which is kind of fun. He changes tires. In fact, now he works at Discount Tire as his job in high school, And my wife is a trauma surgeon. So it's kind of nice. I always feel best when she is with us because now if anything really goes awry on track, I have my own personal trauma surgeon with me as well. But it really takes a lot of coordinating. And then to travel, it's a lot. We did a race in 2019 where I was invited to drive at the International Grand Prix of Central America in El Salvador. And it took months of preparation. And then we had to ship the car to Central America. And then they flew me down and we raced. And then we came back and then getting the car back and all the steps of getting all of your equipment internationally was really a lot of work.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So it's interesting to hear kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about today was how you balance these hobbies or interests that are really intense and take a lot of time with your career and family. And it sounds like for you, a big piece of that is that you often try to involve your family. What about you, Nicole? How do you feel you're able to kind of balance that training? Because when you're training for an Ironman, I would imagine that that is a good, 40 hours a week that you're just putting into training?
It's probably more like 15 to 20 a week, especially when you're getting up into the longest weeks, which is still a part-time job if you think about it, at 20 hours a week. My husband does triathlons as well and does Ironmans as well. And so for us, it's always worked to fit it in because it's, especially when the kids were young, it was our dates. We would go for a long bike ride and that would be our date. We'd have a babysitter come over and, we maybe didn't do the traditional dates going out to dinner at night. We would spend our money on babysitters when we wanted to work out. Now my kids are older, so that's not as much of an issue anymore. But I think that's how we really were able to get that worked in. We do a lot on the weekends. Obviously, weekends are a big time to train. And then just doing a lot. I would do things very early in the morning. I would wake up and do my runs in the morning by myself a lot of times or with friends. So just kind of making it work. A lot of times if I had a break between surgeries or if I had a break between clinics, I'd go and do one of my workouts during that time because you are doing 2 workouts a day, occasionally 3 workouts a day, depending on what you have to get in for that week to be prepared. So yeah, we've just kind of managed to work it around our schedules.
So both of you sound like it's a lot of work. It's pretty intense and you already have a lot going on being a surgeon and a mom and all of those types of things. So I guess maybe one thing a lot of people might want to know is why? Why do you do this? Why do you invest this much time in this?
It's fun. It's a challenge. I mean, I think for me, I've become much more of an athlete as an adult than I ever was as an adolescent. I mean, I did do some athletics as an adolescent, but for me now, it's a part of who I am as an athlete. And so to not do that and to not compete would be very hard for me to stop doing because it's just part of what I do, what I enjoy, what brings me, pleasure in a day to go for a bike ride or knowing that I'm able to accomplish those things, knowing that I'm going to hopefully be healthy into my later years because of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah. What about you, Lisa? Why do you think you continue to put this time and what sounds like an absurd amount of money into racing?
It's exactly like what Nicole said. It's fun. It is so much fun. And, going fast, and there's some people that going fast is not fun. And we do all kinds of women's events and have women drivers come and introduce them to racing. And, I always tell people, if you love it, you should do it. And if you don't love it, just don't because, it's not fun if you feel dizzy or get motion sick. But I have to tell you, I love it. And just having the speed, it's very experiential. And there's no pager. There's no work. There's no kids. There's no wife. There's nothing. There's no other role but being in that one moment and just experiencing all of the G-forces that are going on and the interaction with all the drivers and then accomplishing really technically difficult things very quickly. And, sometimes you do and sometimes you don't. And really kind of becoming a master of your own body and controlling yourself with this incredible machine that may or may not do what you want it to. And it's so exhilarating. It's so much fun.
How would you say that these things have, if they have at all, kind of changed who you are as a surgeon?
Well, for me, it's really interesting because I have brought some of my surgery things to racing. So typically when we race, we do a timeout right before I go. And so we have to check the car and you have to go through a checklist of all these things, because if you make a mistake and you don't, it could be fatal. And very much like what we do in the OR for patients, we're always trying to make sure patient safety. And really, this is just the next step of that because it's your own personal safety. So we had one event where my wife was unable to attend and she and I do the checklist religiously. And then when we come off, we run through and say, what was working well? What do we need to address before the next session? But on one race, when I was out in Nebraska racing and the hood pins on the hood never got latched. And so I went off into this race, and it was like the third or fourth lap. The hood came up and smashed out the windshield. I was at 120 miles an hour in a turn and couldn't see. It was completely black because the windshield was smashed out and the hood was attached to it. So, fortunately, everything worked out great. But, that could have ended very differently. And so really kind of taking all the things that we do in surgery. And I think it makes me a better surgeon because I'm always thinking about what are the possibilities of things that could go wrong and try and anticipate it.
What about you, Nicole?
I think it's probably made me more in tune to my body and my endurance and my ergonomics in surgery. So to do triathlon at the level of Ironman, you can't just run and bike and swim a lot. You actually have to be incredibly strong. So I do a ton of weightlifting. I do a lot of core strength because to get to the end of a 10, 12-hour day, you fall apart in the run if your core is not strong, even though, running really doesn't have anything to do with your core. At that moment, it has a lot to do with your core. So I've just become very in tune to my body, and then any asymmetries that I have or any strengths on one side versus weaknesses on the other. And I think that has come across also in surgery with ergonomics and with kind of positioning myself and making sure that I'm not getting myself in a position where I'm going to give myself a herniated disc or a problem because I'm standing in a way where I'm not in tune to my body and not listening to the signals it's giving me.
So that brings up a question I have. Do either of you use a coach?
I have used a personal trainer to help me when I started doing more of the lifting. And then I definitely use a lot of good physical therapy friends because I've had a lot of physical therapy needs over the years. And both of those people have helped a ton with like the balance issues and the symmetry of the strength and your core and all of that. I've not used a coach in triathlon. I've just done that on my own.
Okay.
Yeah, for me, we have many coaches because there's so many levels of it. The fitness aspect, so I have a personal trainer and then several PT friends similarly. So those folks are invaluable. And then, there are mechanic coaches too, because you need people who understand how your car is working and then what your car is doing to you and what you're doing to the car. And then driving coaches as well, so that you master the art of driving too. And the other thing too is also trying to become, it's really interesting as we become evolved surgeons. You think about when you're an intern and you just don't know, you're learning and so many things. And then by the time you're an attending and you've mastered all these things, you become what we call an unconscious competent person. Like you're just responding very competently and you're not having to stop and really ponder things. And, in a race car, things are happening in milliseconds. And so you have to be able to respond very quickly. And so having all of these coaches to help you fine tune that is really helpful.
What advice would you give maybe other surgeons who are interested in either of these hobbies in terms of like how to start?
Well, I would say that I think the best way to start is to kind of start small, obviously. Although, like I said earlier, I do know people who have put it on their bucket list to do an Ironman and started it at the beginning of the year. And at the end of the year, they were doing an Ironman. So it is possible, but it's probably not possible to do it well or to do it feeling well at the end. You're probably suffering quite a bit to get there in a year. So obviously, it's just starting small. There are tons of triathlons all over the country to get involved in. You can do sprints. If you're not a swimmer, you probably want to join a community that swims, a master's swim group, or maybe even get a coach for a while to teach you how to swim, because that's a very important part of it, is really knowing how to swim and the technique of swimming, not just spending hours in the pool without knowing that. And then joining other groups, a bike group or a running group. I mean, those are the things that we've really utilized a lot to do our training and to learn about the sport and try to maximize our ability in each of those different areas to do our best.
Yeah, and similar for us, it's going slow because there's a saying, in racing, slow is fast. And really, it's trying to get all of your skills really well honed. And it certainly doesn't happen overnight. The thing I would recommend, if you have an interest in perhaps race car driving, take your own car out to a track. And most of the racetracks around the country have multiple open lapping days where you can take your car out. I would recommend having a driving coach for sure to help you learn how your car is prepared and how to actually handle it. But then once you get beyond that and you say, okay, I really like that. And I feel good. I feel comfortable. I'm enjoying it. And really make sure that you totally love it, because you want to enjoy this while you're doing it. And then just move up to the next step and really get a good coach and start driving more consistently. And it's really just hours of track time. And then if you like it, then pursue a competition license. There's a couple of racing bodies, NASA and SCCA, are pervasive all over the US. So they typically will have what's called a DE, which is high performance driving events. And they usually coordinate those with races. And so you can be on the track and you can also be around the racing environment and see if that's something that is really interesting to you. And then emerge, either step into it and go for it, or say, you know what, because there's a lot of people who just do high performance driving. They love it. They drive their own car and they have a wonderful time, but they never decide to step into competition just because it doesn't work for them with the travel and the cost and all of the logistics that go with it. So it's really go in, try it, and find the sweet spot that you like the best.
Have either of you ever been so discouraged after a race or after an event or after an injury or something like that that you wanted to quit?
I'm not sure that I've ever wanted to quit. I think I have definitely been discouraged, but for me, it has just been a motivation to figure out either what my injury is. And luckily, like I said, I have very good physical therapy friends who know always what's wrong with me. So we figure that out. And I'm discouraged as far as the amount of time it's now going to take me to get back. Discouraged when the injury isn't going away as fast as I want, but never discouraged to stop what I'm doing.
Oh, I have. It's the thing. I had a really terrible ski accident earlier this year in January. I was skiing and the binding must not have been connected well into my boot. And so on a downhill run, the ski just came off and I launched and I Supermaned and landed on my head and my chest. And I broke a bunch of ribs and I dislocated my manubrium and had a concussion. And you just, like, the rib part I expected, and that was miserable, but it healed really quickly. But the head injury part, it was a lot more than I really expected. And so interestingly, work was the easiest part, but all of the physical training and all of the race car driving, and I had to do all kinds of concussion clinics and therapies and get cleared before the race commission would let me race. And even when you just go back to racing, it's like, well, that sucked. I'm like, my performance is terrible. And it's hard when you are used to performing at a very high level. And then you come back and you feel like you're okay. And then you get in and then you perform much lower than what you're accustomed to. And so it really was a new feeling for me to slow down and just say, hey, you know what? You're going to be fine, but you have to heal from this and you have to be patient and enjoy the moment that you're in right now, that you crashed skiing and had a head injury and you're driving a race car and you may not be driving as well as what you would normally do. And that's going to come, and just be patient. So it really has been an exercise in patience for me. But yeah, one of the first races, I was like, that's it. This is ridiculous. I'm not doing this anymore. And then, then you sleep on it and you go, that's just stupid. I just need to calm down and be patient and it'll come.
That's great. What's your most favorite car that you've ever had or ever driven?
Geez, my very first car was a old VW Rabbit, and it was a stick shift. It had no power steering and it would not turn for anything. And I was driving way too fast as a teenager and it would not make a turn. And so we would end up hopping curbs on it. So it was called the Baja Bunny. It was a crazy car, but it was fun and it got me around and it was cheap too. So that probably is my favorite car.
That's so funny. My first car also did not have power steering or power brakes. And it's so funny to think back, like, I was not large as a 16 and 17-year-old and I remember like physically putting all of my body weight into trying to turn or trying to stop. Like, how dangerous is that? It's crazy that we drove like that.
Oh, absolutely. It's ridiculous. It's a wonder that I'm even here. Yeah, my first race car was not power steering either. And, talk about endurance racing. Even the shorter races were still so physically exhausting, and there's so much upper body that you have to work and work and work. And so, if you're doing a couple hours in a car, the upper body strength, it's incredible. So you have to train for that. I enjoy my race car now actually has power steering. And every time I get in, and I've been driving this car for several years now, it's always this moment when I pull out to go onto grid of like, oh, this is so easy to turn.
All right, Nicole, what's your favorite bicycle? Because sometimes some of those bikes can be almost as expensive as Lisa's cars.
Yeah,
Sure.
they can be. My tri-bike is a Trek now, and that's probably my favorite that I've had over the years. But I also have a road bike and a gravel bike and a mountain bike. And those are all Canyon, which I love Canyon. So I would definitely recommend Canyon if you're wanting those other types of bikes. But yeah, my tri-bike is a Trek, and it's served me very well. It's gotten me to some great places in triathlon.
Yes. Absolutely. So what's the next goal for both of you?
Well, for triathlon, I've kind of met my major pinnacle, which was doing the Hawaii Ironman World Championships, which is kind of like the Super Bowl for triathlon. I had qualified by being first in my age group at an Ironman in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then went on the next year to do the World Championships. And so that's kind of the pinnacle. And like I said, I think if my body could tolerate it, I'd probably be trying to do that again and again. It was a time when I did that, though, that my kids were sort of starting to leave the house, and I really wanted to spend that last little bit of time with them before they were all gone. So I kind of backed off a little bit. And so I don't have to do that 15 to 20 hours a week training away from them. I'm spending more time with them. But eventually I will probably do much more, but maybe never to that extent again, just because of the toll it takes. So probably more like half Ironmans will probably be, definitely a more doable distance that's not too hard on me. So that'll be my goal, probably the half Ironman World Championships in the future.
And is your husband still sort of right in line with you, or does he do different races, different schedule, or do you guys still train together a lot?
We still do a lot of training together. He does a lot more gravel races now. He's still trying to qualify for Hawaii one day. That's kind of always the ultimate goal. So when we do that, we sometimes do it based on age. And so when you age up, when you're the youngest person in that age group, that's when you do it again. And so that may be in the next 5 years when he ages up, he may take another shot at it. So we're kind of both still doing the triathlon thing, but just doing it on a little bit lesser level than before.
Lisa, what does it mean for you?
Well, it's interesting going to the gravel seems to be our common theme here. For me, we have really talked about looking at preparing another vehicle to do rally racing. And this would be, you could do it on road, but a lot of it is off road and in sand dunes and backcountry. And the fun part about it is that it's a 2-person team. And so there's a driver and a navigator. And so this is something that we've talked about doing because my wife does not like to drive. Whenever we go and we do stuff, she always wants me to do all the driving. And she's done some high performance driving. And she's like, yeah, it's okay, but it's really not my jam. But we've talked about where she would navigate because she always knows where she's going. And, I'm the one that's driving as fast as we can. And it's easy when you're going in a circle, but when you have a destination, like, where am I going? She's like, slow down. You need to turn here. So this would be something that's really fun for the both of us to be able to do. And we could design our own vehicle, and it probably would be some sort of SUV with a lift kit, because again, you're going to be in water and rivers and, really loose sand. And then you would be, some of these races are over several days, so you would have to be able to camp out. So we both love camping and we love being out in nature. And so this seemed like a really nice progression that we could be outside. We could do fun driving events that we could both compete together as a team. And so that's kind of the new frontier that we're looking at.
That sounds really fun. I want to try that.
Yeah. And I think our first intro we've talked about is doing a Jeep rental. I used to have a Jeep, and so I've done a bunch of off-road driving with that just because there's so many people who own that in Jeep clubs, which was so much fun. So we've talked about, hey, why don't we, kind of the same thing about how do you get into it? Like, hey, why don't we rent something and go spend the day and see if we like it and see if she's not car sick, because, if either of us is car sick for that, that's no fun. But try it out and see. And then if it is, then maybe do a couple of sessions with a coach and see if we're any good at it and if we like it, if we have fun.
That sounds awesome. Well, ladies, what else do you want to talk about? Anything that you think we're missing?
So I have a question for Nicole. We do endurance racing, but I think your endurance racing is so intense. I think we have the benefit in the OR, we have such a long focus periods, but what are you thinking about when you're on these long runs? Like, how do you talk to yourself during your races? Because it's like you said, it's an all day event.
Yeah, you don't do as much thinking as you think you would, meaning that, if you're out there for 10 hours, you're like, wow, you're thinking a lot. I mean, half the time you're just kind of surviving in the moment. So like when you're in the swim, you're thinking about like the other swimmers around you, or if you can get on the feet of someone in front of you so that you can swim a little bit faster. You're thinking about breathing. You're thinking about not getting hit in the head. I mean, you're just thinking about your moment. And the same thing with biking, even though, you're biking 112 miles, it actually goes by a lot faster than you think, because you're always having to gauge where you are in relationship to the other riders, because you can't get too close, you'll get penalized. You're trying to think about, okay, how fast am I going? What is my power on the bike? What's my heart rate? Am I keeping all those things? Am I managing all those things well? Am I eating? Am I drinking? Because all of those things really, really matter when you then have to go do a marathon at the end. So you have to really stay on top of your plan that you've already created to make sure that you get all that in on the bike. And then on the run, I mean, that's where you definitely hit the hurt locker on the run for sure. I mean, you're just really surviving. And the most important thing is that you just sort of try to hold back at the beginning of the run. That sounds crazy, right? Like, of course, it's easy to hold back, but it's actually not. You're so happy to be off the bike after all that time that you just want to get started on the run. And so it's easy to actually take off too fast and burn all your energy at the beginning. So you have to kind of hold back and once again, kind of think about your plan and make sure you're following it, because the longer you're at the race, the longer you're doing it, the more likely you just forget your plan. You just stop doing all the things you said you were going to do, like drink and eat your goo. And you don't want to do that stuff anymore. You don't want to eat, you don't want to drink anymore, because you're just not feeling like you have an appetite. You're not feeling really like you want to drink anything. So you have to sort of just make yourself do that so that you know that then you can go to the end. So it's a lot of actual thinking of just about what you're doing in each step. And then obviously you try to kind of talk to people as you're going along, just to give yourself a little bit of motivation as you're going and give them a little bit of motivation to get everybody through the day.
And then if you're doing this, we have a lot of equipment, as I know you do as well, but what's your like little tiny thing that you do or that you have or that you use that like makes you so happy to have? It's like your secret sauce to get you through your whole thing, that it's not something that, not like a big $1 trillion bike or something, but your special socks or your special little something that you do. Like for me, mine is right before I go on track, I have dark chocolate, and that's my thing. Like that makes me so happy. It gets me ready to go. And then I have a little boost of energy to start the race, and then off we go. What's your little secret sauce? What do you like?
Yeah, I guess I would say that my husband and I have like a certain thing that we drink, on the bike. Like right after we get out of the swim, we have a plan that we drink this, and it's actually a mixture called Perpetuum that we put in with coffee. And so especially on a long race like that, especially if it's been cold in the morning, you're getting on the bike out of the water and you're cold. And so you have, not that your coffee's really warm anymore, but just having some coffee with this Perpetuum in it gives you caffeine, it gives you some energy, it gives you calories for the rest of the day. And then I would say the big thing on the run is Coke. Love to have Coke on the run at the end. That's really the only thing you can really get down, and it gives you just a burst of caffeine and energy. And it's amazing what that can do for you at the end of a 10-hour day.
It's funny for how much we spend in, the dollar, your dollar Coke and my dollar chocolate. That's the best spot.
That's great. I'm sort of fascinated also, Nicole. I asked earlier about having a coach, and you said you don't have a coach. You sort of just do all this on your own, but all of that just seems so technical in terms of figuring out, what heart rate you should be in for all different parts of the race, and your power on the bike and your cadence and when to eat and how much to eat. All of that just seems so complicated that you sort of just figured all that out on your own.
Yeah, we've just done it over time. My husband and I have figured it out. We've also had some very good friends who are also into triathlon. We are part of the Springfield Triathlon Club. And so just a group of other triathletes, we've kind of all figured it out together, do a lot of reading, read a lot of blogs, a lot of books. I mean, there's a lot of ways to find this stuff out. And then there are certain things that definitely are more beneficial than others, certain training. And you also have to figure out what works for you, because what works for one person may not be what works for somebody else as far as the training, as far as the nutrition. There's definitely a lot of information out there. I mean, a coach is nice because they would really just tell you what to do every day, which is sometimes the hardest thing to figure out. But it's also something you can easily do if you join a triathlon community. There are people that are very knowledgeable that can help you, and you can obviously figure it out along the way as well.
Lots of Googling.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I actually reached out to triathlon groups because they have so much knowledge about nutrition and what works and what doesn't, that it's interesting. A lot of my eating and how I planned for all of that has come from triathletes.
That is really interesting, the crossover. See, I knew there was a reason we had both of you here tonight. So good. What other interesting tidbits?
Well, one thing I had thought about, just because I'm a program director, and so obviously I train residents, and I think one thing that being this involved has shown my residents is that it is very possible to have a big hobby outside of your surgical career and be able to make them both work. It shows them that it's possible to, block off time if you need to, or you could definitely fit it in. It just has to be something that you make as a priority. I'm glad that I've been able to do that for them, to show them that these things are possible. You just have to make the time and make it a priority.
How many residents have you inspired to do a triathlon?
I don't know that I've inspired any.
Oh, I bet there's a handful.
I don't know, honestly. I mean, I know there are a couple that have done them. I don't know if they did them because I had done them, but we've had lots of runners. But I think it's more just a matter of not necessarily, doing triathlon, but just knowing that whatever hobby it is that they choose, that they can make it work. They can have a surgical career, have a family, still have a big, big hobby that they love and be able to do it.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. I'm also an academic, and as I like to say, I'm a recovering program director. I think that it is really important to set that example of having balance in your life and still being able to be a pretty hardcore surgeon, but have a family and have intense hobbies and those sorts of things. I do think we have to make sure, though, that we're not making it look too easy, because I do think the other side to that coin is then if somebody can't quite get to the level that you're at, that then they could feel like a failure. And so I do think it's important for mentees and trainees to sort of know, like you even said this yourself, like start really slow. Don't try to think that they can come out of the gate and be Nicole Sommer, Iron Woman, surgeon, residency program director, et cetera, all at once. And that it's a slow slog to kind of get from where you started to where you are now, but that it is possible.
Right. Well, and I think I've always told everyone the part of the reason I got into triathlons was because I was an okay runner. I was an okay swimmer. I was an okay biker, but I'm good enough at all of them that I can be a really good triathlete. And so that's fun, right? It's fun to be able to kind of put some things together that maybe you're okay at, but now I can really compete as a triathlete. So, I think it's also finding what it is that your niche is. And once you find that, it's just fun and exciting to continue to do, because it's a great experience, and it's great to be able to compete and outside of being a surgeon, something where you're physical and enjoying it on a day-to-day basis.
I think that's great.
I think it's important. I think it's important to consider too that remember where Nicole and I are in our career too. Because, you think about the evolution of that, our priorities are always going to be changing based on where we are in our life. And so, when you have young kids, no matter what age you are, those kids really are time consuming. And so that becomes such a major focus. And certainly your training is important. And, ultimately, you may have all these hobbies, and I dive. And so over the years, I did diving when I was a young woman. And then when I did my training, I didn't try, we just couldn't really travel. And then when I finished my training, I started diving again and then being able to travel. And now it's something I've encouraged my family to do and we all do together. But now I'm at the point now where I can be a dive master and help teach other young people to do that, because I have the time to be able to do that. But when you want to add something in, no matter how big or small, it just always is going to be on the priority list. And those priorities are always going to be shifting because, at any moment we could have something happen with one of our family members. And now all of our attention, including work, goes to the back burner. And now you're dealing with a medical issue with a family member. So it's always on a spectrum. And so the thing that I would encourage young people to think about is it's not about being a failure. It's about doing what you love and doing it as much or as little in the time you can figure it out to make it work. And the thing too, I think we're high driven people. And the thing that I don't ever want to be known as is Lisa Hunsicker, the surgeon. I just want to be known as Lisa Hunsicker, the person who, does surgery and is diving and is race car driving and those things. It's not, I don't want to let that identify me. I just want to be a person. And I think that we are such highly competitive people in general and such high intensity people that I think we can be the problem and push ourselves a little too hard. And the thing I would just say for younger people is don't try and define it in terms of failure. Just make yourself happy and do what you love.
I think that's a really good point about you're not necessarily doing all of this all of the time. I first started doing triathlons when I was in medical school, and I did them a little bit through residency, not to the same extent, obviously. And then when I had my first child, I did still do them a little bit. But then after my second child, I stopped doing triathlons for 8 years. I didn't do them at all. I sold my bike. I didn't have time. I was new in my career, and I had 2 little kids. And then the third, I couldn't do it. But then eventually the bug came back. The kids got a little bit older. I was able to dedicate a little bit more time. So you're not necessarily going to do your hobby full bore the whole time. You're going to have some ebbs and flows to it.
It's like the saying, you can have it all, but you can't have it all the time, right?
Yeah, all at the same time.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Well, this has been so great. Any last minute things, you guys, or should I do our little closeout?
What's yours? What's your hobby?
Me?
Yeah.
I am not as intense as either of you. I also have 3 kids and they're sort of at this age. They're 2 in high school, 1 in middle school. And I feel like right now, honestly, my hobby is my kids. And you just mentioned when your kids are little, they're so time consuming, but I sort of feel like I'm actually in a phase right now where it's not that they need me as much, but I want to be around them more than maybe when they were smaller. And so things have shifted a little. So I actually also do triathlons, but it's been a number of years since I've done one, and I've never done a full Ironman. I don't know if I ever will. I would love to sort of check that box, but maybe when my kids are out of the house and I have more time and I'm twiddling my thumbs, I would love to put forth the energy to really train for that. So yeah, I love skiing. Unfortunately, Lisa, I also had a ski accident last year. So it took me out of commission for a little bit, but I love skiing. I love traveling. I love hiking. I love triathlons. I love running. I love biking, but I don't think I do any of those things to quite the extent that you guys do. You guys are pretty incredible and inspiring. And I think that's so great.
Thanks.
Okay, guys. Well, I just want to thank you, Dr. Lisa Hunsicker and Dr. Nicole Sommer, for sharing with us not only your intense hobbies, but also kind of how you balance all of that with being a mom and being a partner and being a surgeon. I think it's just been really inspiring. And I just want to thank you. This has been great.
Thank you so much.